Good morning, everyone. So my name is Max Smeets. I'm a senior researcher at ETH Zurich and director of the European Cyber Conflict Research Initiative. And I have the pleasure to host this wonderful panel on, indeed, downgrading cyber warfare, where we will primarily focus on the conflict in Ukraine. Of course, an issue that has been touched upon already before over the past day and morning. The way that this panel is set up is that we first try to draw out some of the key lessons on what we have seen in Ukraine for cybersecurity and cyber policy, and then hopefully do a deep dive into some of the key issues that we have seen over the past 2 months. Brigadier General, I would like to ask you first, from your unique perspective, both directing the National Cybersecurity Center as well as the Cyberspace Defense Forces, on kind of lessons learned from Poland here.
Okay, so good morning. Thinking about those lessons, I believe there are plenty of lessons that could be drawn from the world. And I would like to focus about 3 of them, which in my opinion are quite important. Basing on Russian past behavior, I expected that the conflict with Ukraine will be a kind of cyber Pearl Harbor. And however, Ukraine did their homework from the past and were able to defend themselves. So I believe it is worth noticing that nowadays Ukrainians are able to withstand attacks, Russian cyber attacks, successfully, and they have created, built their cyber forces based on the experience and information given by their allies. So the lesson number 1 is that we can prepare for cyber conflict. And to do that, one should invest or learn the lesson from the past and cooperate with partners effectively. So I believe this is one lesson. Lesson number 2 is that Russians are quite good in offensive cyber operations, but not good with defensive ones. For example, anonymous group has proven that Russians' critical infrastructure could be hacked even by individual. So this gives us a kind of perspective. And however, and lastly, we should bear in mind that the Russians still has capabilities, and we must be prepared that they could operate offensively in the cyberspace. They have capabilities to do so, so we should not think about them as the country without potential in cyber. But the conflict, the war shows that they are not as good in defensive perspective, which gives us a little bit a good feeling. Thank you.
And so if it's so important to draw out lessons of the past, I think this is a perfect bridge to Baroness Pauline Neville-Jones, who of course has such a wealth of experience in UK government, not least chairman of the Joint Intelligence Committee already in the early 90s, and then became a Minister of State for Security and Terrorism. What are the lessons, the kind of long-term lessons that we can draw here then?
Well, thank you very much for allowing me to join this panel and talk about this really important issue. And I agree with absolutely what the General has just said. I put my reaction, I suppose, to what we should try and learn from this under sort of 2 heads. One is, I would say, 2 Ds, destruction and disinformation. On the destruction heading, the General was quite right to say, I think, that Ukraine turned out to be a good deal better prepared in the cybersphere than the Russians had probably anticipated, which has, I think, a lot to do with why this aspect of warfare hasn't featured as much as we thought it would. And we focused our attention on the kinetic activities of the Russians, the abominable way they have fought this war. less than we would have done if we had seen much more destruction on the part of the Russians in Ukraine by cyber means. But it didn't mean they didn't try. They did. They're not well coordinated. They probably didn't use it to greatest effect, but no doubt about their intentions and their attempts. So what lesson does one draw? Well, it seems to me that we've been warned. We shouldn't be comfortable about the level of success that's been had so far. And one of the things that I do feel about the longer term is that while NATO has said, in rather vague terms, I might say, that certain cyber situations might constitute an Article 5 situation, where everybody comes to the aid of those who've been attacked, there is no strategy. There is a great gap between what member states do, the extent to which they coordinate, which we heard about just a moment ago, but there isn't a NATO doctrine. There isn't, we don't know where our red lines are, what would provoke an attack, how we would respond, when command will be transferred from member states to the alliance. We need to know these things. And that is, it seems to me, even in what we heard from the NATO Secretary General, his representative, we need a lot more work in that area, combined with the very important work that's being done on advanced technologies. Second thing I would say, and comes under the disinformation heading, again, who has won the information war? Ukraine, hands down, because of brilliant leadership. And I think without that leadership, we would not, as a community, Western nations, democracies, actually responded as well or as fast as we have done. It shows how important the information domain is in the cyber world. We need to bolster all of that. And that is a work, obviously, of the European Union, of the alliance, of member states themselves. But we need to talk to each other much more, I think, in a much more concerted way than we do about what it is we mean by values. What do we mean by freedom of speech? Where would we seek then to take retaliatory or combative action? How do we divide our effort between defense and potential attack mode? We've done this in the past. We did it during the Cold War, and I think the time has come when we're not talking about just Russia. We're talking about a fight for ideas with the autocracies of this world. We are in a new phase, and we need to face up to the fact that we have a big information agenda.
So we need on the ground our shields up, but we also have to think about the high-level strategy and not forget about information operations that are still crucial. Tomasz, Zdzikot, what's your perspective on this?
Thank you very much. It is not easy to start sharing some remarks after such an intervention. But first of all, I will say that it is not easy to draw conclusions from the war that is still ongoing, of course. And we do not have, in my opinion, full knowledge about its course in the cyber domain, about tools that have been used, and about forces that are really involved on both sides. But, of course, we can try to formulate some theses, some remarks, but being still aware that they do not reflect the full picture. So, first of all, as General Molenda said, the digital Pearl Harbor, as many analysts or high-level military commanders expected, did not happen, actually. We can discuss why. It didn't, but it didn't, of course. So now, in observing what is going on, like numerous attacks hitting new and new websites, attacks organized, for example, by independent hacking groups. Well, I think that I'm very close to sharing the same point of view that Professor Kieran Martin just wrote. Kieran Martin, the former National Cybersecurity Center director in the UK, who calls for cyber realism in a time of war. So he calls to realistically look at cyber capabilities. Of course, cyber capabilities are important. They can make life of the citizens of the attacked country more difficult. They can be disturbing. They play a great role in an information warfare. They are a very powerful intelligence tool. They can be used and are being used for targeting also, for the military, for the land forces, for example. Then they play a great role in joint operations, but they do not do what the tanks, artillery, and fighter jets can, of course. So cyber capabilities are not the great red button. Then you can really blow up critical infrastructure in the other country, sitting very comfortably in your operating room in your country. This is not happening, and it probably will not happen in the future. Of course, on the other hand, the biggest mistake that we can make would be the regular, very popular mistake, when we would be preparing for the war that has just happened, and not for the one that lies ahead, of course. So it is a question of the risk scenarios for the next war, for the future, not for the past. And maybe it is also a thing to be discussed later.
Yeah, it's a good first point you also made about we don't have the full picture. But someone who may have the best picture overview as to what we see today is our next panelist. And it's really wonderful to have you here with us, Colonel Oleksandr Potii. Would you mind sharing your perspective, what you could say perhaps on the ground as you're seeing today in Ukraine?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining this panel. And first of all, to thank our partners, especially Great Britain, Poland, for supporting Ukraine in the war against Russian Federation. Unfortunately, the war is not over, and the Ukrainian people fighting for freedom and European values. Today, war is coming not only on the land, at sea, and the air. The war against Ukraine is being coming in cyberspace. This is a fact. Cyber attacks also being implemented against European countries. This is a global fact and global trend today. In my small input word, I give few facts about cyber attacks in Ukraine today. The first, the number of cyber attacks has more than doubled. For example, the first quarter 2022, we had more than 800 cyber attacks in different objects of Ukraine. Key sectors that are under cyber attacks is the first, government and local authorities, the website, government agencies, special database, and so on. The second sector, the energy sector. After this, sector of security and defense, and financial sector. Very powerful attack we have of telecom sector for national telecom company. Russian Federation used different cyber attack methods: malware, collection of the data, use vulnerability software and hardware, abusive content, and so on. So cyber attacks today are an element of the Russian war against Ukraine and another country. What main goals for Russian hackers today? Different goals. So to collect information about public and private sector, public and private infrastructure, and individual citizens, and so on. The second goal, to destroy the information infrastructure and the object of information infrastructure, for example, telecom sphere, software industry, and so on. Third, to destabilize the situation in the country, spread panic, chaos, to destruct the authorities among the citizens, and so on. The second goal, to cause of humanitarian disaster affecting civilians, and so on. We can see different goals during cyber attacks. Very interesting fact that cyber attacks are synchronized with military attacks. For example, simultaneous missile attacks on Odessa and cyber attacks on the city government website. Simultaneous missile attacks on the broadcasting infrastructure and cyber attack on media and telecom infrastructure. Simultaneous DDoS attacks on the Ukraine railways and missile attack on the railway infrastructure and railway node. So we have that cyber attacks planned with military attack and the conventional attack on infrastructure, on node of control and telecom infrastructure, and so on. This is a very important fact today. Another sphere of cyber attacks is propaganda. Propaganda remains Russia's most powerful weapon. We see that Russian and pro-Russian hackers are highly politically motivated. The number of cyber attacks by ideological activists is growing. Russian hackers hack media and social accounts on Ukrainians to spread propaganda, and Russian hackers enjoy impunity. This is cyber attack, propaganda attack, and another activity of Russian says that cyber war is a new reality today, and this reality with no rules. Thank you.
Thank you. So with the panel, we've touched upon a couple of lessons and aspects here, right? The variety of cyber operations, perhaps not the highly destructive ones, but certainly this kind of point that David van Weel mentioned, that cyber war is certainly on all the time in conflict and perhaps out of conflict as well, and potentially taking in place, as the Colonel said, in parallel with kinetic force, the role of non-state actors, the importance of information warfare, and the role of propaganda. The question then is, how will this change in the months ahead as this war unfolds? Will we see changes in potentially Russian cyber operations or the way we can defend? Baroness Neville-Jones, would you mind shedding some light on this first?
Well, I think quite a lot depends obviously on how the, if you might have, the kinetic war on the ground goes. I think the Russians have not found it easy, I think, to strike blows of a kind with cyber power that they might have hoped. One of their difficulties is ensuring that they don't have major overspill. Major overspill, which of the kind we saw with the Viasat attack on the first day of the invasion, risks for them retaliation from outside. No, it gives the NATO partners, gives others, third countries, a valid reason for a counterattack. They want to avoid that, I think. So they're not well coordinated. They have not, I think, been able to use cyber in joint operations in the way one would have expected. So I'm not convinced myself that we will see a major improvement or major gain in Russian cyber capability, particularly as Ukrainian capability in defense is maturing. It started out well. It was planned from at least 2020, if not before. And it's been, I think, a remarkable operation. So when one might one see something that is unexpected, what one does have to think about is a Russia that is facing humiliation. The possibility of really openly having to admit that this operation, this special military operation, isn't getting anywhere. It doesn't mean to say they'll leave the country, I fear, but nevertheless that it's not succeeding in its avowed objectives. then I think we might see something which is more reckless, which raises the stakes a good deal. That would be, I think, my worry in the cybersphere. Is it likely? It's possible. What I think is more likely, of course, are things which really do strike horror in our hearts, which is chemical and potentially nuclear, particularly, I think, chemical. So I'm not one who thinks that this particular conflict is going to produce big outcomes in terms of cyber, the use of cyber as a weapon of war. I do think it is very, very important to us in what we then do as allies and as partners to ensure that we're properly defended and have capabilities of a kind as well, offensive capabilities of a kind we need in the new world. And that is the task, I think, that we must focus on.
In some ways, I see a positive and a negative message here. And also a positive one in that, at least from your assessment, Russia would not not necessarily targets outside of Ukraine. It doesn't have an interest in it, but it might become, the negative message is it might become more reckless, and we will see more of these butterfly collateral spillover effects. Brigadier General, what are your thoughts on what will change in the coming months?
It's in such circumstances, I believe that Russian cyber activity will not change in the next few months. And no many sophisticated attacks should be launched at the Ukrainian critical infrastructure. I believe that Russians could mostly focus on psychological operations in or through cyberspace. And this could be like our worry as well. What's more, I believe that we could not rule out that Russia could use non-state actors to launch offensive operations towards Western countries in response of sanctions. And I believe that this is a question of decision point. When the decision point happens, I believe Russians or the groups that affiliates with Russian government are capable to do that.
Mr. Zdzikot, you already mentioned the role of non-state actors. Is that something that you would think will change the coming months, or are there other aspects that you think are really the most important ones to focus on?
Well, I totally agree with Madam Baroness and General Molenda that we cannot expect much more from the Russians in the Ukraine. But it doesn't apply for the other Western countries, of course. Well, I do expect some more actions because to tell you the truth, we don't know what tools could be used, what tools would be used in a large-scale attack on a highly developed and heavily digitized Western country, and what costs, what damage could it make? We have some examples like the ransomware Bulgarian Post a month ago. Large-scale incident, and as I heard, it still doesn't operate. So we can expect some more from them in the Western countries. I do think so, but I do not expect kinetic actions coming from the cyberspace. So it won't happen. They won't blow up any power plant. It won't happen, and it is also a threat for cybersecurity awareness, in my opinion, because if we will be preparing for the war that has just happened, then there is a real threat that we will only see those kinetic capabilities. So we will focus only on tanks, only on fighter jets, only on artillery, and we won't see the real cybersecurity or cyber tools potential, because the Pearl Harbor didn't happen. The digital Pearl Harbor didn't happen. So it is a threat for all the cybersecurity community to communicate what tools can be used and what are the risk scenarios for the Western countries.
Colonel Potii, you already mentioned the potential integration of cyber with kinetic forces. Will this integration further intensify in the coming months, or will we see any other changes?
Thank you. Today, and my colleague in this panel, told about many things, many important things about cybersecurity tools, about cyber protection, different objects, and so on. But today, we need look on cybersecurity, maybe another side, more wide side, more wide perspective. Many of us today, and this panel too, compare cyber attacks with digital Pearl Harbor and use on like as nuclear weapons, for example. If so, we have to raise question like this. First, how to prevent cyber attack on critical infrastructure? Yes, today we have a good instrumental for cyber protection infrastructure. We have cyber response team, we have CM and another instrumental. But how to prevent, not response, not only response, how to prevent cyber attack on critical infrastructure on the state? Second question, what measure should be taken to make the aggressor refuse to use cyber weapons? The next question, what condition should be created to control the development of cyber attack tools? Mr. Tomasz say about that today aggressor and hackers have powerful cyber attacks tools. What conditions should be created to control the development of these tools? And another question, how can we prevent the aggressor from using cyber weapons? I believe that the answers to these questions can be found within a concept of cyber deterrence, like is nuclear deterrence, for example. Let me outline the main elements of such concept for a broad discussion on this forum, and different research group include Center of Security Studies, for example, from where Max work. Basic element this concept I propose. First, the state should have adequate cyber securities, adequate cyber capabilities and cyber power. The country should demonstrate that it can conduct active cyber operation against the aggressor. Second, effective and evidence-based attribution of cyber attacks. The aggressor must know that an active cyber operation will be identified and evidence of the aggressor's involvement in cyber attacks will be presented. 3. Effective prosecution and punishment for organizing and executing cyber attacks. Organizers and performers should be aware that they will be prosecuted for carrying out cyber attacks. For individuals is criminal prosecution, for legal entities and states the application of economical, political, and other sanctions. 4. Development and implementation of system of preventive measures against the creation, acquisition, and distribution of cyber attacks or cyber weapons, cyber attacks tools and cyber weapons. 5. The government should take control over the development of cyber weapons, cyber attacks tools, and the implementation of active cyber operation in cyberspace. 6. Widespread and common use of cyber defense and cyber protection methods and tools. Cyber defenses must be implemented at the individual level, small and medium enterprise, regional level, critical infrastructure object, government, interstate and international levels. Only many levels guaranteed powerful defense, cyber defense. 7. Introducing common rules of responsible behavior in cyberspace that are mandatory for all countries. Cyberspace norm should be developed. We need to build trust in cyberspace. We must develop responsible behavior of countries and organizations in cyberspace. It is also necessary to create and implement an effective system for monitoring the implementation of these cyber norms. 8. Formation of cyber-human capacity and cyber-human reserve of the country. It is necessary to develop various forms of cybersecurity education. We should introduce cyber hygiene for citizens, cyber hygiene rules. We should introduce cybersecurity culture rules in enterprise, government agencies, institutions, and so on. We should introduce cybersecurity offices into organization and critical infrastructure object. Human resource must be trained starting from school, and universities must be strengthened. At the state level, we need to maximize and manage cyber personnel potential and form cyber workforce to protection to country. Elements of this concept need to be clarified and expanded. I hope that forum will become a platform for being to discuss this element of this concept and develop concept of cyber deterrence. Thank you.
Thank you. So we certainly need to raise the cost and reduce the benefits of the adversaries, and perhaps not just deterrence, but if I hear it correctly, there are some elements there as well. The need to disrupt potentially adversarial capabilities and try and take them away from them. Brigadier General, as the cyberspace defense forces are kind of developing right now in Poland, do you share this perspective on the importance of cyber deterrence, or are there other elements that you are now thinking about?
Yeah, so I could agree with that. That deterrence is quite important part of the capabilities of cyber. That's the reason in Poland, for example, we have a brand new bill about the cyber forces as well. There's a definition of cyber forces, and the definition states that cyber forces are obliged or should be prepared to operate in whole spectrum in cyberspace. So that's the reason why we should invest in not only defensive capabilities, but also intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and offensive ones. So yes, so deterrence is, of course, the adversary should know or should be aware that that the country that is he or she targets could respond with cyber power as well. The other thing is a question mark of at what circumstances this power projection or cyber offensive capabilities could be used, and so this is, I believe, a topic for another debate. However, there are countries that are quite comfortable or are already learned these lessons and stated officially that they will or they could operate offensively in case of an attack. So I believe, like UK and the US, they already are. Their posture is obvious, and I believe we as Poland, we should go the same path, that not only protect or defend ourselves, because it's like you know, in the life when you only defend yourself and your opponent knows that you are not able to hit, you will always lose.
And it seems there are some similarities in the US-UK approach and the Polish approach when it comes to integrating the intelligence and the military aspects, right? The UK has developed a concept now around being a responsible cyber power, where it tries to be both responsible and powerful in cyberspace for the years ahead. Where do you see the UK position developing in the years to come, and also in relation to other countries?
Well, the UK has done quite a lot of institution building in the cyber field. We were one of the first, I think, to decide that this was not something that simply could be contained inside government. You had to have an outward-facing agency, which could actually then speak to both private sector partners, but also to the general public. And that's been, I think, a major move forward in the general level of a cyber awareness in the UK. And indeed, we now have not a cybersecurity strategy, we have a cyber strategy, which goes much wider and includes the development of skills. It's an attempt at a recipe across the board of the kind that was being mentioned from our speaker from Ukraine. And I think that's very important. I think the other thing that we need to do is, up to now, I think the sort of cyber battle, the one, you know, where it's very difficult to decide and to be sure about attribution, I think we're now getting out of our fear of attributing. We're attributing. Our degree of our level of certainty is sufficiently good. Not always easy to demonstrate and prove, but nevertheless usable. In that situation, what we've now seen is transparency come into the scene. I mean, it was a major move for the UK and the US to use their intelligence capability and reveal what they knew. And it was part, actually, of the development of the Western posture at an absolutely crucial moment. We need more of that. If you want to make the general public of a country cyber aware, they have to understand what their government is doing. They have to know what their government is doing. They have to know why their government is doing it. So it has to come out of the shadows. It has to become part of daily life. I mean, not to cause anxiety, but actually in a form which people know this is a threat, this is something we need to deal with, and what's more, our government is dealing with it, and we have a part to play. And those are all, I think, future elements in how you move forward on the cyber scene. In the UK, where there are more bodies being developed inside government, you know, we now have our Signals Agency and our Ministry of Defence cooperating in offensive, defensive capabilities. There's research to be done. This is not a field where we know everything. And the research capability combined with operational capability is an important part also of national picture, and where allies need to share. Because, you know, the weakest link remains a problem. So I think we begin to understand how to move forward in this field. There's a very great deal to be done. I personally think that the information side, you know, the whole business of how we stand up for values is the single most difficult bit. I mean, why would be surprised that that's the case? It is a very difficult thing to do, but we do have to focus on that as well.
Early on, you mentioned also the importance of public-private partnerships here. Mr. Zdzikot, what's your perspective on this? Having been involved in multiple different roles, you must have a view on how to work with the private sector or how the government should collaborate there.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I do agree that the time of being afraid of attribution has ended, and that's great. So we have to attribute, then we can act, and we have to act very actively, as General Molenda said. We have to be active. We have to use all the tools that cyberspace offers for us, and we have to be ready. We have to be ready to act also offensively, and it is next step also for the Polish cyber forces, and we are looking at the United Kingdom strategy about the concept of the cyber power, which is very interesting, and which is also a way to go for Poland, I guess, in the upcoming years. What we expect from private-public partnership, as our friend from Ukraine said, very good points. I agree very much, especially with the one about creating active reserves and about ecosystem and education. Very important points, and they are visible in many panels. I think that in all the discussions during this conference and all the other cybersecurity conferences, a very important thing to do, and to involve all the sectors in this concept. Applying to Poland, yesterday we were discussing about the power, cybersecurity power concept and how can it apply to Poland, and we see clearly that there is one thing maybe a little bit lacking in Poland, which applies to the market, cybersecurity market, which is not that large scale, and we do really expect that it will rise, which is a task not only for government, of course, but for all the ones gathered in here, especially from the cybersecurity, Cyber Made in Poland cluster gathered here.
Thank you. I would normally have given our friend from Ukraine the last word, but I see that we're already running over time. So all I can say is I very much hope you can join us next year in person, that the situation will allow us to do so. And with that, I would also please join me in thanking everyone on this panel for these terrific thoughts, and I hope we can continue the conversation over the next coffee break that is starting right now. Thank you.
Thank you.